Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cathouse Proper. My name is David Dixon, and I am the director of Cathouse Proper. Let's see where to start. Okay. Cathouse Proper, we're in Carroll Gardens, and normally, if we're not on Zoom, and at 524 Court Street in 524 Projects Building, which is the sponsor for Cathouse Proper. You enter on Huntington Street. If you've ever been here, it's a little bit tricky to find, but we're on the second floor above Buttermilk Channel, a very popular restaurant. So yeah, you may have heard us chatting a little bit. I'm admitting people as we talk. So a little bit about the setup here. So you're at the sub-surrogate walkthrough for Michele Rushfeldt's exhibition titled Rakish Exhibitionist, which includes 8 sculptures by Michele and a single Mapplethorpe photograph, tulips from 1988. I think we want to thank Jamie Martinez, who I see signed up here, for Jonas Albro, who wrote a review in Art Day Fuse about the exhibition. It came out about a week ago. And on the panel tonight, we have, of course, the artist herself, Michele Rushfeldt, Jane Ursula Harris, and Tanya Marquardt. So you'll see the setup there for our sub-surrogate walkthrough. So Michele has a camera, Jane has a camera, and Tanya has a camera. So whenever they need something or need for us to see something in space, they're going to refer to their sub-surrogate, and they'll show that sculpture or those details of that sculpture. So that's sort of the way that we're orchestrating the walkthrough. And then we'll have our panel. Michele, very briefly, I'll go into some bios. Michele graduated fairly recently, I think 2019, from Pratt MFA, and is now a resident at Artcake. Jane Ursula Harris has written, I think, for every art magazine that there is, so I won't go into all of them, but she's also published widely essays in presses like Duke University Press, Yale Press, and has written about, I would say, Jane, you can probably characterize it better than I can, but I think queer, punk, identity, gender are some of your themes, and hence your presence here today, which I saw that you were commenting on something of Tanya's in Instagram, and I've known Jane for a long time, but that made me think that maybe we could all have a good conversation here. So Jane's written about Janice Peorage, you've interviewed Kim Gordon, Ron Athey you wrote about, who has a show participant right now, right?
Go see it.
Yeah, so all that's good. And then Tanya Marquardt is a author, published recently a book that was picked by The Advocate as being the 2018, Best Bio and...
Best Queer Bio and History pick.
History and Bio of Queer in 2018, which is titled Stray, Memoir of a Runaway. And it's been converted into a play. And there's also been a second play by Tanya that's called Some Must Watch While Some Must Sleep, which is a great title.
It's a Hamlet reference. That's what Hamlet says to Horatio when they decide how to watch the king.
Oh, I forgot about that.
Very good. See how good this conversation is going to be? Jane, who is an art historian, who we all respect for being as such, but she was instructed very specifically not to research or to learn anything about Michele's work in advance, although I think she cheated, because we want a fresh eye, like the audience themselves, who haven't been to the space and would be coming here like Jane herself for the first time. Whereas Tanya, I would say, knows Michele's work quite well, and Michele also, and I just got this today, which is a catalog where Tanya writes the entry for it, for Michele's sculpture, which has some of the work, has some photos from this exhibition in, and also has other work in there. So Tanya, I would say, I don't want to mischaracterize, but knows Michele and Michele's work very well, but is not necessarily a big art gallery goer, let's say. But
I like me the art.
It's the arts, right. So, I mean, that's what I felt like we had this sort of drama going where we have Jane, the art historian, but she hasn't seen the show. And then we have Tanya, who knows the work quite well. So there's kind of differing sort of points of view that then also I see that our sub-surrogates are hard at work already getting us introduced to the exhibition. So I think I've pretty much done my job at this point. Let me see if there's anything else I should.
Let's get going.
Yes, Tanya, exactly. Tanya's going to start us off. They are going to start us off with the land, I would say, acknowledge.
So David asked me to help to do the land acknowledgement. So I'm Tanya, I go by they, them pronouns. I'm a third generation Magyar Canadian visitor and settler here in Lenape-Hoking. And also Cat Proper, I found out today, Cathouse Proper is also on Canarsie and Munsee land. So I'm not sure where you are all coming from, but certainly if you feel like it, you could type into the chat if you know the land that you come from, whether it's Lenape-Hoking or Munsee or Canarsie land, or wherever you might be. I can also come from Coast Salish land. But something that I like to do when I'm thinking about acknowledging the land is just taking a moment to breathe and to feel my feet bottoms. So if you can just take a moment and acknowledge that you have feet, your feet have bottoms. Those bottoms are maybe touching the carpet, maybe they're touching the ground, maybe you're outside, wherever you are. And then underneath that is probably pavement, underneath that, maybe concrete, underneath that is the earth, underneath that is the land. The land is so close to us. We don't always necessarily feel it because we're in this urban space, but it is. Everything we see is of the land, and and the land is of us. And so that really helps me to sometimes feel just what it is to be in Lenape-Hoking, that it is this beautiful land that has this history and that speaks to us and is still present and with us. And so I guess, in addition to inviting you to think about Lenape-Hoking, to learn about it, to get involved and be active in Indigenous sovereignty, is also just to feel the land when you can, to feel the air, to feel your feet, and to feel, all the histories of this space. And when it goes down and down and down and down, this Lenape-Hoking, this land, beautiful, beautiful space that I'm so lucky to be a visitor on and to be a settler here and to work to hold hands and find space and continue to find space to acknowledge the sovereignty of the Indigenous people and specifically the Lenni Lenape people on this land. So I think that with that, and also just to say how lucky I feel to be here with all of you and to share space with all of you. That's it.
Well, I mean, thank you so much for both of you for participating and for talking, for even just, preemptively participating in the discussion about my work. Obviously, it's so wonderful to hear discussions about work when you've made it and you're looking for, you get that outside perspective of how other people are interacting and perceiving it. So just, even just preemptively, thank you both for participating and talking about my work. So
very happy to.
Yeah, it's good to be here.
Yeah. So, Jane, I know you
just get started bossing people around.
Yeah, you want to boss somebody around? Do it. Go for it.
I thought for the sake of the audience, maybe what we could do is just do a little tour that emphasizes the materials that you're using, right? Because I believe you're using bondage tape and latex and rope and all these things that obviously relate to BDSM and kink culture. And so Sabrina/Jane, could you take your camera and move in and maybe kind of isolate some of those materials? Maybe they're all in one piece. This is what I don't know.
Yep, they're up there. Yeah, there she goes. So it looks like she's zooming in on a piece called Hooked. That piece is bondage tape with iron hooks that have been sort of crusted with rhinestones. And so it allows them to kind of have that little glint of color, even though most of it is black and white.
Yeah.
And it's being kind of hoisted up on the wall.
I mean, it's kind of interesting because, you know, you think of those hooks. I mean, speaking of like Ron, Atheist Show, you know, you think of those hooks in skin and the kind of, you know, pain / pleasure of that and that kind of transcendent feeling that comes with that. And I sort of look at this and I think, you know, bedazzled deviance. Somehow I just kept thinking of those two words together, bedazzled deviance. But you called the show rakish, which, you know, makes me think of, you know, kind of a rake, that kind of cliche, you know, kind of disreputable, but, you know, alluring kind of male. But this is obviously a body of work presented very much from a female point of view. So I don't know who titled it, but I'm just curious, and I thought other people might like to know about that.
Sure. So me and Dave worked on the title for it together. So the idea of rakish was something that we were toying with regards to like the raking light, and how my work is basically, it's focused a lot on the performative when it comes to exhibitionism. So public exhibitionism with regards to sexuality. And so a lot of these sculptures are, when I photographed them to kind of give these images to Dave, we both noticed that that I like to photograph them in like a really dramatic, high raking light, to give them like this sort of extra stage lighting, this like performative drama that is actually very much alive in Mapplethorpe's photos as well. So the idea was to kind of take the raking light and also apply it to the rakishness of Robert Mapplethorpe, and for me to kind of like borrow some of that rakishness myself, and perhaps give the viewer or the, you know, the question as to whether or not I was referring to myself as the rake, or or Mapplethorpe, or even just the work, you know?
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
And then of course, exhibitionist, the sculptures themselves are exhibiting themselves. They are exhibitionists. They are performing their poses and acts and performing their glittering, and so they are the exhibitors.
Well, I think Tanya, you had talked about, you know, what I thought was interesting, you know, how they kind of both simultaneously represent some of the accoutrement or toys or tools of, you know, a BDSM encounter or a dungeon, although they're friendlier. Maybe it's the white walls. But but I wondered, you know, if you wanted to talk about that.
Right. So for me,
because their bodies as well.
Yeah. So for me, when I look at the pieces, I see them as referencing very specific tools like hooks, like dildos, like rope, you know, these things that you would use it in a way to do very, I guess in some ways, very technical things, to tie someone up, to suspend someone, to cover their mouth, to, you know, to do these things. But also because of the way that they're sort of sculpturally placed, they become performers, like they sort of reference the body in and of themselves. So Michele's body is notably absent from the work. We also don't see human bodies in the space, but because of the way that Michele has placed the work and also used materials to suspend them, to kind of make them look as if they're bonded in some way, they become the bodies themselves. So you see the tools as almost the muscularity of what a body could do or might do, or what you might imagine it could do. And then what happened to me anyways as a viewer is that I then started to place myself. So at first I started to go, oh, Michele, seeing Michele in the space, maybe, you know, her relationship to kink. And then because her actual body is absent and we see these objects and we see them suspended and you know, folded and mashed together, I start to wonder, oh, look at these bodies, and then I start to myself. manipulate the body into the work, which becomes almost an invitation. I feel like Michelle's inviting that sort of playful fantasy into the space.
Yeah, it's like the viewer's voyeurism is kind of also on display, you know, in a way that I really like. Although they have this, for me, they have this, I don't know why I'm thinking medical, but somehow, you know, that sense of like those extensions or those things that relate to the body. I mean, even like, I think there was an image of a tongue gag in there. You know, there's that whole like medical side of some BDSM, you know, toys and tools that really comes through for me in the work. Maybe someone can get a little closer.
Yeah. Why doesn't somebody go, one of the sub-surrogates? Yeah, okay, good. My sub-surrogate is on it. So, good boy. Anyway.
There we go.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so there it is. Yeah, and so that's in like the darker area of one of the rooms of the exhibition that's meant to kind of be in this sort of like raking light shadow that's casting across the floor.
That's a mouse gag, right, Michelle? That's covered in the rhinestones? It's a gag. It's a gag, right? Is that a gag?
It's a gag. So it's from one of the leather full-headed GIMP masks that has the gag that actually goes on the inside of the mask into
the mouth,
participant's mouth.
Yeah.
And this is just the tongue part that has been glued onto the face of this sort of sculpture, and then has been obviously crusted with rhinestones because, you know, that's what we need. So, you know, and I believe some of them are orange. They're orange rhinestones. So,
oh, they are?
Yeah.
Why did you choose orange? All the rest of them are silver. Was there a particular reason?
You know, I have this fantastic drawer in my studio here that has all of these different rhinestones just like piled in it. It's just delightful. It looks like a fifth grader's like craft corner. And you can just open and be like, what does this sculpture need? Does it need orange rhinestones? Yeah, sure, great. And it ends up being kind of dependent on what I think that particular sculpture needs. And in this case, it needed a little bit of color. And I don't paint as much anymore. I used to be a painter. And I use paint when I need to use it, but most of the time I prefer the materials themselves to already have the color that I'm trying to use, because I feel like using the materials that are the exhibitionistic tools themselves, as opposed to sort of creating the color by painting it, feels a lot more direct somehow to me, or it's an interesting process to kind of watch the color go on with these rhinestones. And yeah, I mean, it's sort of like the bondage tape, how it's already this sort of like shiny black, and it's this tool.
Yeah.
I like the fact that it lends its color to the sculpture as opposed to me putting this like paint color on. It really just depends on the piece though. Sometimes I want to paint. So
well, I'm actually I'm going to move the sub-surrogate. So Tanya, move towards the white piece suspended on the floor and do it now. And do it well and give us a good shot of it. Okay, this piece you painted.
I did. See, so sometimes I lie, sometimes I really do paint.
Well, the thing that I love about this piece is, I don't know if folks can see it, but to me, when I look at it, like when I first saw it, I was like, oh, is that, like, did Michelle spray paint this? Like, is this cloth? Is this sailcloth? Is it?
Jane Surrogate, get closer on this work, please.
Yeah, we need you closer. No.
We need another camera. We need another camera.
Yep.
Anyway, but you can see it, that it's like, it took me a while to realize that it was actually like a rusted piece of metal, which is a found piece of metal that you found, right? I mean, but then to me, it also looks like a shoulder blade. It looks like bone to me, like, and then, so it's like this layering of materials and this layering, which reminds me of the body and reminds me of identity and reminds me of like like Jane, like I love what you said, that there is a kind of medical, like just a literal referencing to what a shoulder blade can do, how it can bend, what it does when it bends, you know, and then, but then also like the emotional quality of what it is to be suspended, what you have to do, how vulnerable you have to be suspended. And I know, I mean, I love this piece for that layering.
That's what, I mean, the reason that these are abstract and that they are not just representational picture, you know, sculptures of people doing kinky stuff is because I'm much more interested in sort of the emotional embodiment as opposed to the physical, you know, picture of someone being hoisted. I like to sculpt how it would feel to watch somebody be this vulnerable, to kind of have it be this abstract notion that encompasses that, as opposed to, you know, take it the way that I used to paint figurative paintings that sort of were also along this line and had a lot of the same content, but they were completely representational, and therefore, you know, they didn't allow for sort of that emotional interpretation that you just hit the nail right on the head with that. And yeah, I do. I mean, when it comes to painting it like this, I mean, finding these pieces of metal, when I do use found objects, I'm usually inspired by the way that they remind me of a body, the way that they remind me of the life that they've lived, and how, you know, contorted this is, and how it's already got this sort of pose that it just needed to be hoisted. You know, it just needed to be dependent on this architecture, you know.
And also that kind of a relationship that's between two bodies, you know.
Yes.
You know, there's that sense of trust and reliance that I feel like that sort of the implied heaviness and that sense that this thing could just fall apart without this harness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that too. Like it feels so like solid and vulnerable simultaneously. You know, like sometimes like I feel like because of it's a used piece of metal, that if I get too close, like I might actually cut my skin. You know, like it has that kind of like strength, but then also it's very vulnerable. Like the way that it's suspended, if it shifted one way or the other, it would be very easily the white metal would fall out and collapse to the ground. So it's like both the strength and the fierceness and the vulnerability and the openness, which I think is held in kink sensibilities and held here. And you can see it in the Tanya sub-surrogate showing the tie as well. You know, you see the knots, which, you know, does have a kind of physicality to it, does kind of feel like hands or fingers intertwining. And also is like literally, if you pulled on those strings, the whole thing would like collapse. So it's like the strength of the knotting, but also the vulnerability in that it's actually quite easy to untie.
Yeah.
And that's made out of latex. That tubing is latex tubing that has been tied and knotted to kind of hoist the white part of the sculpture up sort of on its tippy toes. So it's kind of being forced to hold this almost kind of uncomfortable pose where it's kind of reaching forward. And if you were to shift it a little bit, it would sort of lose its balance because it's balancing a little bit precariously at the moment. So I like that sort of how submissive or dependent it is on the architecture.
Yeah.
It gives it like this kind of reaching away from the wall, but kind of dependent, leaning against the wall. You know, it needs it in order to sustain this pose. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about, like that interdependence. You know what I was thinking about? I mean, I don't know if this resonates or not, but, you know, looking at the work, and we're talking about there's kind of, you know, a playful quality, and it's personal, and it's, I mean, even though aesthetically it's not, you know, perfectly aligned, but it makes me think of Hector Garcia's work and Nayland Blake's work. You know, they have this kind of post-minimalist aesthetic to some degree that relates, I think, to yours, but and they also deal with, sort of bondage and those elements of kink culture in their work, but in a personal and a playful way. I don't know. I don't know whether those artists resonate for you or not.
Yeah, and I mean, being playful. If you didn't have the rhinestones, these could be very serious pieces, and they still are. They have a lot of sort of like the formal qualities of post-minimalism, and a lot of like this sort of there's a lot of symmetry, there's a lot of balance, they have a lot of sort of, I was formally trained as a painter, and so a lot of this still comes out in from a lot of the lessons that I learned when I was younger, but somehow it's taken on like this new form where it incorporates a little bit of that humor and that playfulness with these like rhinestones. Whose sub-surrogate is that? Jane's sub-surrogate. Can you zoom in a little bit more on those rhinestones right there and move a little bit so people can get, so you can see like this is made out of, that piece is called ledge play. And you can see how, even though it's like this really like intense kind of rubber that's just been like wrapped around this shelf, how there's kind of this little glimmer. It's hard to catch without seeing the sculpture in person, but you can get a little bit of the glimmer when it goes by, when, you know, the camera goes by it. And it's sort of like adds this little bit of camp, like this camp that gives you like are these bedazzled? Like what could
right
be? Exactly. And so I love that sort of hint of humor infused.
It makes them, more accessible, but yeah, they still have this, I wouldn't say there's a menacing edge, but for people, as soon as you get closer and you see the more figurative elements that, are sort of objects related to, things like cuffs and restraints and gags and harnesses, that sort of brings maybe even a novice, or I don't know, whether or not people will see those things. It seems to me today with like, that whole whatever it is, shades of gray bullshit that
We're going there. All right.
You know what I mean? I'm just saying, I feel like it's become so kind of, people understand it now and are playing with it, which is good. But I don't know whether, without those elements, how much of that would be available. But then you're, as I said before, like this bedazzled deviance kind of makes it accessible in I think a really nice way.
Yeah. Well, Michele, you referenced, the reason that I titled the title essay, or the essay in your art book on Dirty Beauty was, again, maybe I'm just like quoting people for titles or something, but you said that about your own work, that you really like this idea of dirty beauty, yes. That something can like hold within it a camp or a glittery element or something. I'm actually very curious about that term, why you use that particular term of dirty beauty, which I think is, I love it as a writer, but
yeah. Well, so when it comes to, I kind of love the aesthetic of like kind of a dirty, grimy, sparkly 80s nightclub, like that's like fun. And so thinking about just kind of taking some of like that kind of messy sexiness and incorporating that into these sort of almost formal sculptures that end up infusing these things together, it creates for me this sort of elegance, this balance between this sort of dirtiness and this elegance that I feel like I don't see very much in art, but I see it quite a lot in kink. And so there's, I mean, when if you go to these exhibitionistic sort of like these kink parties or any kind of, you see any sort of exhibited sort of kink event, there's these people, they're serious business. And that's one of the things that I love about it, is that you just, from a voyeuristic sense, watching people really get into the role playing, the costuming, they're, it's taken extremely seriously. And one of the things that I find sort of delightfully amusing is how the elegance, the commitment to role playing, the exhibitionism, and the humor of it can all kind of come together into these kind of beautiful scenes that you see people performing. And I feel like it's just never going to get old, me trying to like create these characters that are embodying all of those things together.
Well, could we just, jumping off what you said, can we look at that now? I might be not get the title right, but the four-legged
on all fours.
On all forms. Can we look at all fours, which I think is so playful, because it's like referencing a dog, and it's like, and it's also referencing a sub, and then there's like this bedazzled dildo that's like hanging off the back, and then there's like a lot of stuff that's going on, and also this is found material as well, right? So it's also like dirty in that kind of way as well.
The steel is found, and then I welded it into there. Some of it was kind of the way that you see it, and then some of it I had to twist and kind of weld into a different spot. And so I found it. It had this beautiful pose already. I took it.
Was it from furniture?
Yeah, right.
I mean, who knows? I have a great friend, James Hyde, the artist, who lets me like ransack some of his junkyard, and I get to find some of these beautiful found metal pieces from it, and then I take them to my studio and I rework them, I heat them, bend them, weld them. And obviously sometimes I create sculptures, from scratch, but in this case, this one was just already kind of had this lovely pose that I bent, and then I wrapped it with bondage tape. And, I had it in my studio for a while, and I was looking at it and I was like, I just feel like it's not done. It was looking at me. It was watching me in my studio. And then I had this bedazzled dildo that I had bedazzled, just when I was watching Netflix or whatever.
Jane, move in close on the dildo, please.
Yeah, we want close-ups on the dildo.
Close. Right on it.
Dildo, yeah, real close.
Now lick it.
Jane, I like you a lot.
Jane. Lick it.
One of the many things that I love about this dildo is
on that at this point. But yeah,
one of the many things that I love about this dildo, sorry, just to interject about the dildo for a second.
Yes.
It's like, it's so bedazzled and wonderful that you're drawn towards it, right? And then of course, is it a double dildo?
Yeah.
Yeah, so then I think about all the ways that I could use that double dildo. And then I realize that I can't use the double dildo that I'm looking at because it's bedazzled, but that if I could, I really would. Right? So it's like, so playful. It's like, oh, it's so beautiful. It's bedazzled. I'd love to use that. Wait a minute, that wouldn't be good. But also, it's a double dildo, and that's amazing. Maybe I should get myself one or something. I don't know. So it's like got this like really playful, really inviting element to it. Like I can't use it, but if I could, it would probably be pretty fun.
One of my
pretty amazing.
One of my favorite things about this sculpture, because I truly think it's probably one of my favorites that I've ever made, is that it looks like a drawing, and it feels like a three-dimensional drawing. So right. Even when I'm looking at it right now, obviously we're looking at it on a 2D screen, so it looks even more like a drawing. But even when you get into the gallery with it, it feels like you're looking at like a line drawing that's come to life. So
it's also got this kind of like ad hoc, there's like an architectonic and like scaffold quality to it.
Totally.
That that like almost like it's this own little world, and that dildo, like it's almost like the dildo is the spider in this web.
Oh yes, Jane.
Yes. Oh my God, I didn't even.
A beautiful silver spider dildo.
Yeah, weaving its little environment.
Yeah.
Love that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we started with the piece against the wall, which I'm sorry, with the hanging bits, but that also was found, wasn't it? Wasn't it like there was found on train tracks or something like that?
Yeah. So the hooked piece that's over by who's this? By Tanya's sub-surrogate, behind Tanya's sub-surrogate, hooked. Yep, there you go.
This is like from the train tracks or something, which I love.
So
really?
Another friend of mine had those.
Jane Surrogate, please get up close on that and do a round tour of that piece. Closer, 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 closer. Nice.
Beautiful. And so it has a wood piece under it that had those iron hooks on it, and it just like is this beautiful old piece of whatever. I mean, machinery, who knows? It's like this. It looks like it could have been from a train track or something, but I collect these things, and they live in my studio, and until one day they turn into something. They could be in my studio for a year, and I could be wrapping it or changing it. And, sometimes it only takes like a day or two for it to finally come to like its final form. But yeah, the wood part was a found object. And then it's got fabric that's hoisting it up against the wall. So it sort of has this air of being something that's very hard, but actually the thing that's hoisting it up is very soft. It's fabric that's just been wrapped with bondage tape. So it ends up being, again, like very submissive to this wall where it wouldn't be able to, it's just balancing against it like a battering ram almost,
Right.
Yeah.
And
right,
it's
if someone was to push on it, it would swing.
Tanya was talking about earlier, where it almost feels like a tool, that it's like it's supposed to be used for something, but you're not sure what that something is,
Right.
Well, yeah. What's interesting is that there's this layering, because it's like these found objects very, very likely was a part of some kind of tool, and then you're using them to reference these pleasurable tools that actually have these sort of like very physical functions, tie someone up, suspend something, which kind of does have a relationality to tools in other ways. And then it's referencing this sort of more psychic or emotional quality that can come from what happens when you use it.
Yeah. Yep.
Maybe you could talk about, it was interesting you mentioned that, you sort of find these materials and that sometimes it comes together in a day or two. And so, I mean, people always love to know about process. Maybe you could talk a little bit, I'm sure it varies, but what's your general process? Do you just collect materials and sit with it, or do you kind of configure and reconfigure, or do you make drawings?
I very rarely make drawings. When I make drawings, the drawings usually just stay as drawings because I end up being fine with it as a drawing. And then I start to make something and it doesn't look anything like the drawing. Usually when I have a plan, that's when I get bogged down and it doesn't turn into anything that's worth, thinking about. It's when I just start making something. If I just start wrapping something like a piece of metal, or I start bedazzling something, I start, doing sort of the methodical process of putting rhinestones onto something, where I figure out what the next move is. I have drawers of materials like just like leather strapping and rhinestones and gosh, what do I even have in here? I have glue, I have like paddles and like chains and pieces of metal that sometimes just find their way into some of these sculptures. Sometimes I'll connect them to other pieces that I've made, and that completes it. But it's almost never planned. If I start heating a piece of metal and bending it, I might come up with the next move. I'll be like, oh, well, now I feel like this needs to be a circle. So I'm going to bend another piece and weld them back together to make this like O, like the one you see behind me in my studio. But it's never usually this sort of planned drawing, whatever. And it's interesting because a lot of the sculptures in the show are black and white, or like mostly black and white with little hints of color from the rhinestones. And this is really the first collection of works that I've made that are so minimal in their colors.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There's a few red ones that I've made recently. I've incorporated some red, a little hints of color here and there, but before, up until I'd say maybe last year, they had a lot of colors. And the paintings that I was making before had even more colors, because they were trying to kind of get to this like colorful sort of sexuality, this like animalistic, almost like really bright, fun violence with the colors. And recently it's just sort of turned into something a little bit more direct and a little bit more simple with the colors. So I've let the rhinestones kind of do their job. If the rhinestones are enough, they're enough color. So
I think they're happy to do their job.
Yeah, I think everybody should have a drawer full of rhinestones. That's my
or a bedazzler.
And a bedazzler. I remember those when they could bedazzle your jeans.
Yeah.
Who is
yeah, let's go look at that one.
Yeah, my sub-surrogate. Can we zoom in on this one's called Squirt. And
you want to talk about the title?
Yeah.
Sure. I feel like
it may be self-evident, but I know what it means, but you maybe talk about it in relationship to your thinking about that kind of an orgasm in relationship to all the spikes.
Absolutely. So, this is a little piece that's on the wall here that's getting this really kind of almost minimal lighting, so it can get that nice deep shadow on the left. Oops, we went away. Where'd it go?
Oh, there it is.
And it's got nails that are driven into it, and it's got black tar that's painted on it, like roofing.
Oh, that's tar.
It's like roofing finish that's black, so like tar. And these nails are driven in, but then there's rhinestones on the end of each nail that gives it like this kind of white, sparkly glimmer. Can we get in really close to one of the rhinestones? Yeah. Okay, you can kind of see a little bit.
You can kind of see them at the end.
Yeah, so you get like this kind of beautiful little sparkle on the end of each of these like really intense kind of like violent looking nails, because they're really big nails, like they're not messing around. So it makes it feel like, even though the nails have been driven in, that the sparkles are almost coming out. So it has this sort of like internal, this like violence to it, but then it also has this kind of like sparkly, wet beauty that's being kind of driven out at you.
I see now. See, now it gets the connection between, the way in which that work is made and looks. Now I get it.
And it feels like a squirt to look at because it's wet. It's like it.
Right. Well, I think I couldn't see the wetness of it at first.
Yeah, it's got like this kind of sheen to it.
Yeah.
And that is one of the older pieces in the show. That one's from 2019, and that one's.
Oh, so what that is there? Then the work is the last couple of years, or?
Yes. Yep. All of the pieces from this show are all from the past 2 years. Again, I think this is probably the one. This is probably from the end of 2019, and the other one that is right by Tanya's sub-surrogate to the right. That one, which is called High Sticking. That is the other one from 2019 in here. And these two, you can see the similarities to them. They sort of led the direction for a lot of the works that you see here. And that one's got, it's foam, painted foam that has wood sticks that are kind of being jutted into it and also look like they're coming out of it at the same time. That's being sort of hoisted up against this wall by two rubber strips.
You can see the beautiful, you know, the lighting there, the shadow play is really beautiful.
Yeah, I really love
very rakish.
Exactly.
Very rakish.
Exactly. Rakish, raking, you see, it's very
really rakish.
Yeah, and so Dave did a very good job lighting this hallway for these two sculptures. That just makes it feel like they're really these very over dramatic performers, like these dynamic beings that are just like have these beautiful long shadows that are casting throughout the whole wall. They feel like they're on a stage.
It's sort of got a almost like a film noir kind of feeling to it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that dramatic lighting.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that I have to say, like, you know, okay, I love that the Mapplethorpe is in there and I love that it's tulips, but for me, Mapplethorpe, I always think about, okay, yeah, like, yeah, he did all of this, you know, he's part of the leather scene in the 70s and, you know, he was an insider and, you know, he gave us some great, incredible photographs of that culture. But then, you know, when you think about his Black Book, I don't know, you guys familiar with that project?
I'm so glad you brought this up. I'm so glad you brought this up.
Like, for me, it's yeah, like, and if people that are listening don't know, you know, Kobena Mercer wrote a really incredible article kind of, you know, dealing with the racial fetishism in Mapplethorpe's work. And you know, Glenn Ligon did his notes on the margin of the Black Book, also kind of much more subtly dealing with it. But I wondered, yeah, so I just had to say that because that's just me. Like, I needed to just say, like, I think Mapplethorpe is really problematic as a celebratory figure for all of that. But what was the choice with the tulips? Versus, I mean, I like it because it's not as sort of obvious as if, you know, you'd put in something from like one of the leather pictures.
Yeah.
But did you have a choice, or who made the choice?
There was a couple of options, and they were all basically the ones that Dave, because Dave was the one who was looking for the photograph, and he basically chose one that he felt like would add to this sort of like dynamic lighting that he'd seen in my work, because we'd been talking about doing a show for a little while, and also one that pointed to the sort of the history or the rest of Mapplethorpe's oeuvre, but wasn't so blatantly obvious that it was going to point to the content like a screaming, like bright red sign. You know, so it sort of has this cross-generational discussion about sex and kink and exhibitionism and voyeurism and rakishness, but also has this subtlety of, you know, we're talking about light, we're talking about formal qualities of artworks, we're also talking about sex and kink, and bringing in this photograph as being such a different type of medium than what I work with. So kind of pulling at the contrast of the different types of mediums as well, even though they have a similar sort of feel with, I mean, if you go up close to the photo, you can see, where's my sub-surrogate? There we go. You can see it almost has like this, I mean, it certainly has the drama, but it also has the sort of like violence, and in that shadow that feels like this kind of beautiful sharpness that a lot of my sculptures kind of try to get at. So I felt like it was a really interesting choice. I mean,
I do too.
I'm not a photographer. Yeah. So this is very, very different from the work that I create too. So.
Thank you. I was just curious. I mean, I figured that Dave probably picked it and, you know, smartly did not pick, you know, something over, you know, one of the figurative images, but yeah.
I was thinking the only other ones that I thought would have worked would have been like the ones with the wrapping around the head that I've seen. but something not as explicit as some of his photos, like that, you know, where they're so blatantly about what they're about, even though they're beautiful, you know, they're great photographs.
Yeah.
This just feels like a sort of a more subtle hinting choice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. Were you going to say something, Tanya? And I totally interrupted you.
Oh, I mean, no, I mean, I guess just to echo what Jane said earlier about Mapplethorpe, just that I just have this very complex, you know, again, as a 15-year-old person who didn't know whether they were queer or not, Mapplethorpe's Polaroids of his lovers in his studio was like the first thing that I saw. So, you know, but then the further you get into his life and what he did in his photographs, yeah, it just is a very complicated and charged, especially racially. And I mean, it's just good to bring it up, to note the complications of it. Yeah,
it's true. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I guess we got like a few minutes. I'm like, I feel like I kind of touched on the stuff that I was thinking about as we were going along. I don't know if there's, how much time is left? We've got a few days left to see the show, right? People can make appointments.
Yeah, so you don't even need to make an appointment. There's only five people allowed in the gallery at a time. So you can show up, and if there's, you know, if there happens to be 5 people already in there, just wait for a couple minutes. But so it's going to be, you know, open for the rest of the weekend. Dave is coming back. There he is. He can talk about it.
Dave is crawling out of the closet.
A gallery expert.
As one must.
It's a bunker.
A bunker, I'm sorry.
Out of the closet, that's a good one. Yeah. So maybe you should do question and answer. Did the panelists all feel satisfied in their?
Oh yeah, no, very much so. Yeah.
Everybody has a question, they can put their hand up, or which is probably, I'll unmute people, and then if you want to say something. So what do I do here? Unmute.
I think they can. So Dave, yeah. I think they can unmute themselves.
Yeah, you put your hand up, and then I select you, and then you can unmute yourself. I think that's it. So if anybody has anything they want to say, otherwise, we'll just keep talking. So I don't see anybody just yet. So
I'm sure somebody has a question. Come on, folks.
Tell them, Jane.
Ask anything you want.
Yeah,
you know,
you can take it.
This is your moment. Yeah, right.
I like that shot that we got from the sub-surrogates at some point there was a shot on the flowers and the same raking light on the high sticking piece. Looked very nice.
And I love the way that wall looks with the photograph and the sculpture too, because their light is sort of matching each other, and like the shadows is they sort of match each other in this strange way. It's a little hard to see, you know, unless you're there, but there's these really nice shadows that are behind Bycatch, this big piece that's in the corner there. And so I think that was a really nice decision to for Dave to put those two pieces together. And also this one sort of like reaching into the room. There's something really nice about having 3 cameras in the space, because it allows you to see that, like, how these pieces are positioned in relation to each other. So I think
it's a beautiful installation.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I
David, maybe you want to talk about what drew you to Michele's work, since you haven't really, joined in here.
That's what, with the 3 cameras, it was, I hadn't even seen how, I mean, of course I knew that the light was raking in the same direction and everything, but to see them right next to each other like that was pretty strong. So even here on Zoom, you can see things that you wouldn't necessarily overtly see in the exhibition. So there's, but I met Michele installing Jane Hyde's show here, and then did I call him Jane Hyde?
Yeah, you did. I was
Sorry,
I'm gonna let it slide. I won't tell him. Don't worry.
Yeah, well, you know, it's all about bi culture here. So anyway, Jim Hyde, and then I did some studio visits at some point. I think when you were still in Pratt, even, and you were sort of only just transitioning into sculpture, so it was a pretty quick development there. Michele, and that was very impressive. So, and then the first thing, after one of the studio visits, once you were at Art Cake, which I don't think I mentioned Art Cake yet. Yeah, I did at the beginning. But so Michele's in resident at Art Cake, but was on all fours. If all the sub-surrogates would attack all on fours again. But the on all fours, I always wanted it to be in exactly that spot. So that was the first thing, because I really love the way that fourth leg sort of disappears into the wall, and it really articulated well Michele's notion, which I find out is a subtlety in her work that really I think sets it apart, in that the way that the sculptures are dependent on the architecture. So there's that old conversation between art and architecture and who's the dominant one, you know? And Michele's work, because I chose all the pieces and then realized that they were all attached to the wall. And I thought I had some sort of inbred prejudice against, I don't know, freestanding sculpture. So I said something to Michele about it, and she was like, no, all my work attaches to the wall.
For the most part, yeah.
Yeah, for this very reason, that the art and there's this you know, a codependency, I guess you would say, between art and
for a while, I tried to make sculptures that were freestanding, and you know, they just kind of sit there. They don't really like do anything for me. They just kind of like, they're just kind of sitting on the floor, and I'm like, well, you know, I need it to be like doing something, or like pushing away from some. It's really, they just weren't dynamic in the way that I wanted them to be. So I started to kind of have them be pushing off of the wall or hanging on the wall, or, you know, in some way dependent on the walls or the ceiling even. I think the one that's actually the most kind of passive, I guess you could say, in this show is the shelf, is ledge play. And that one, it's the only one that I kind of feel like it's almost like the person in the corner at the party that's like waiting for somebody to come up to them and start talking to them. And they're like, it's like waiting for something to happen to it, you know?
It also has a weird surveillance, like, you know, at like a club or something, there's always like, there's surveilling people that, you know, that's all they want to do.
Yeah, it's that creepy guy.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's not creepy. It's just, it's part of like, I mean, it's like, you know, I'm talking about like sex club situations.
So that's the most recent sculpture by Michele, and I think you showed me that about 2 weeks before we were going to do the show, and yeah, that really helped position the works, because originally Bycatch, which is the one on the ground over there, surrogates, Bycatch, now. Okay, and over there on the floor, you see it needs a corner, and there's only one true corner in the gallery that doesn't have windows, and that's that primary corner over there, which was competing too much with On All Fours. And one of the interesting things is that On All Fours is made out of rebar, whereas Bycatch has this tubing that's rubber, but they're the same dimension, so one can confuse the two, and I liked that artifice and that sort of play there. So I liked them near each other, but Bycatch was kind of really in too much. So once we got the work in the space, it seemed, oh, that can go over near the opening, near the hallway, and also made it dynamic in the sense that you come in under it, which is a way that you wouldn't normally approach the sculpture. You usually have to come from the front. So you really feel like sort of surging forward and out from the hallway, which is, so I was pretty happy for it to find a spot there. And then it cast those nice line shadows on the wall, some more of Michele's kind of drawing in relationship to drawing in her sculpture, which behind you, we can even see there, Michele, there's quite a few. That circular one that's in the back behind you.
Oh, yeah.
I know that's a big, that was a close call, that one.
No, oh, really? Oh, yeah.
But we didn't have enough room.
This one's got rhinestones all over it too. That one's...
Yes, more rhinestones the better. Everyone knows that my favorite song is Rhinestone Cowboy, so maybe that was another reason why I was drawn to the work. Well, good gracious, we don't have any questions.
You know, that means that we did our jobs.
You covered everything.
You know? I mean, we just explained it. We did all the jobs for them.
Right.
Yeah, it's so wonderful to be here with. It's so interesting to be here with you, Jane, and you, Michele. Like almost like 3 different generations of Kinksters or something. I feel like, you know, like we're all from different places in, but we have this like shared vocabulary. It's just been really nice to be on a panel with you, sharing thoughts and knowledge.
Very happy to be, participating. So it's nice to meet you both virtually too. We'll have to hang out in real life when we can.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, all right.
Take it away, Dave.
Yeah, the show's open for 2 more days. So if this hasn't satisfied your need to experience this sculpture, which I hope it has not, because we do still live in 3 dimensions. Please come visit at 524 Court Street. The entrance is on Huntington, around the corner on the 2nd floor. Cathouse Proper at 524 Project Space. I thank you guys very much. Tanya, Jane, Michele, and Michelle, beautiful work.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. So wonderful.
Cool, everybody.
And thank you to the surrogates, of course. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.